Throughout all of Russia, humanity is spread thin, utilizing any resource necessary to stay alive after the Great War of 2013, a war that saw the near extinction of life as we know it. Using underground metro stations within Moscow or small remote villages located out within the overgrown mountains, humanity is doing everything it can to just stay alive and keep safe from the mutants that roam the lands. No matter where Artyom and the Spartans go on their travels, they always encounter new people who in their eyes are lost causes with ideologies and lifestyles far removed from their own. Despite this, they do all share one common trait, and that is the will to survive. However, as the remote villages continue to live on and the Moscow metro stations where Artyom once called home continue to rebuild in a hope that one day they will emerge and see life on the surface once more, there is one city that is very different to any other location within the Russian homeland. That city is Novosibirsk, a cold barren wasteland filled with ice and snow everywhere. The city is littered with cars, buses and military equipment everywhere, but yet there isn't life to be seen anywhere. Demons do not fly overhead, watchmen do not roam the buildings, and underground it gets even worse. Rotting corpses of humans litter the abandoned metro stations, wearing face masks and wielding weapons. Areas of the metro are flooded, areas are filled with muck, and once again, there is no life to be seen, unlike with the metro stations of Moscow. So what happened here? Why is Novosibirsk so different from Moscow? Why is it filled with dead bodies wearing masks? And what is this goo that fills the station? Well, in this video, we look at the origins of Novosibirsk and how it became known as the Dead City. Novosibirsk was one of the most populated cities within Russia before the War of 2013, housing over 1.6 million people. Its metro stations were the third most used within the country, seeing around 200,000 riders per day. And before the war, life was pretty similar to what was seen within Moscow. However, as the war within the Middle East started getting worse and nuclear weapons were emerging as a final resort for some of the factions, it became clear that the Russian government had to take action. As the war got worse and Russia got involved within it, targeting the Americans and their allies, Novosibirsk started becoming ruled and protected by the military. The military unit was known to all as Oskom, which appeared to be the group known solely for the protection and evacuation of Novosibirsk, for if the nuclear weapons came. Like with Moscow, the metro stations began to be set up to be used as bunkers for if they needed to be used, and strict laws came into action now that Oskom was in full control. As the war got worse, however, so did Oskom. They started taking action against the civilians who were desperate to get out of the city. Gridlocks started to form and the military had to get involved to try and make sure the evacuation went without issue. But with the panic rising, civilian protests came out. People started scrambling for safety as they couldn't get out of the city due to how many vehicles had littered the roads. People started trying to pour out of the metro stations, but like with the events within Moscow, there just wasn't enough room for any more people. It is also believed that because the metro stations were not as deep as those within Moscow, they needed to be sealed to let in as little radiation into the stations as possible. Because of all these things happening and with the panic rising, Oskom fired from their tank a sabot rounds into the metro entrance, sealing it off completely, as well as taking out all of the panicking and protesting civilians in the process. Whilst this was going on, the government and military started setting up their own operations within the place known as the Institute. With the war getting closer to home and more brutal, the military needed to focus on their own weaponry. Here within the Institute, scientists started working on biological weapons they could use on their enemy. With these biological weapons they had created, they utilized testing sites outside of the city in places like Volga to see how deadly these weapons worked. Within the mission with Anna in Volga, we see that the biological weapons they had created would destroy the lungs and slowly kill the host. But with all these biological weapons being created, they also worked on the cures for in case their own soldiers got caught up in the gases they sent into wars. Here they created the cure known as Redigan F, which was still in its experimental form. However, it is said to repair all damaged tissue, especially within the lungs. Alongside this, the scientists also realized that nuclear war was pretty much inevitable, and because of it, radiation was going to be off the scale. This prompted them to start working on a way to help humanity survive from the harsh nuclear winter and incredibly powerful radiation that was going to sweep the land. Here they created the drug known as the radioprotector, or how everyone has known it, green stuff, which was stored in tinted glass vials with a triangular logo with the Roman letters ZE printed on each of them. ZE stands for Zelenka, which actually translates loosely to the green stuff. The logo is also important as it was the same logo as the Oscom faction, meaning that all of this drug was handed out and controlled by Oscom themselves. Only they could give it out and would try and make sure that it was used for all of the population of Russia, but more importantly, Novosibirsk. It is also rumoured that within the institute other darker experiments took place, similar in fact to what was going on within the Moscow area known as D6. Here it is said that the scientists would experiment on animals, trying to turn them into super soldiers to utilise within the war, similar to what was reported on within Moscow and how maybe the Dark Ones came to be. This theory would then lead to the idea that the blind ones found within the institute are actually man-made and were probably once apes turned into deadly beasts that now had advanced abilities, similar to that of the Dark Ones. With rumours of these experiments happening within Novosibirsk, America became aware of this area and deemed it as an extremely deadly one that needed to be prioritised within their attacks. As the bombs started being launched into the air towards their final destinations, Moscow and other cities were hit by hundreds of nuclear warheads. However, Novosibirsk, being regarded as a key target, was hit with something much more powerful. As the bombs appeared overhead, it was clear that they were not the standard nuclear warheads, but in fact these were known as cobalt bombs. Bombs that would produce enhanced amounts of radiation fallout, which would completely coat a large area in radioactive material. This bomb's effects would basically ensure that nothing could live on the surface, be that humans or even naturally made mutants. This bomb would see the complete wipeout of the city. One Oscom soldier stated that when he saw the bombs hit, they went off miles away from where they were located. However, as a small cloud formed overhead, he realised what type of bomb it was and realised it was all over for everyone. As the cobalt bomb hit, it coated the city in nuclear fallout, preserving the city the way it was prior to the bomb arriving, but wiping out all life forms who were located on the surface. Even though it seemed like the fate of Novosibirsk couldn't get any worse, for the inhabitants who survived and made it underground, life for them was going to get much harder. The surface of Novosibirsk was pretty much uninhabitable, much like the city of Moscow. However, within Moscow, that was mainly because of how dangerous it was with how many mutants roamed the lands looking for anything to eat. Within Novosibirsk, the surface had radiation that was 8 times higher than any other city hit within Russia. The radiation is so intense that even soldiers who wore specialized lead-lining suits along with their gas masks would only be allowed on the surface for a few minutes before being hit with the effects of heavy radiation poisoning. Luckily for the surviving inhabitants of the Novosibirsk metro stations, they were able to keep alive simply because of the drug created by the Institute before the war known as green stuff. Also, luckily for the survivors, prior to the war, the green stuff was going to be shipped to all of the cities within Russia. However, this was then cancelled, meaning that Novosibirsk was able to keep all of the manufactured product and live off of it. Because of how important this green stuff was, it started being used as their own form of currency, much like how bullets were used as currency within the Moscow metro stations. If you did a lot of work, you would be paid in extra green stuff in addition to your given amount anyways. Oscom once again was still in control of these metros and were the ones in charge of distribution. The green stuff was incredibly necessary for the residents because, unlike the other metro stations as mentioned before, the Novosibirsk metro was much higher to the surface, meaning radiation was able to hit them more often when roaming about doing their tasks. Because of this, any anytime someone went to a radiated area, their clothes and their gear was taken off of them to be deradiated, and they were all given a mandatory jab of green stuff to cleanse them of their radiation. Life seemed fine within the stations, although a bit harder to live. However, problems hit the station very hard and fast. According to the novel To See the Sun in 2033, stalkers would venture to the surface to fulfill their job of scavenging to find any and all resources for the metro stations, utilizing the green stuff to make sure their journey to the surface could last longer than just a few minutes. When venturing to the surface, the stalkers reported seeing a black cloud mass which looked completely unnatural and covered half of the sky. Being confused by this odd sight, the stalkers reported their findings back to the metro station. This black cloud, however, was dropping black mold spores onto the city grounds, spreading them into the stations. This mold continued to spread, absorbing every organic thing in its path and working its way down to the metros. Picture the mold as the symbiote from Venom crossed with Calvin from the film Life. The more it consumed, the bigger it got, and more deadly it became. But the soldiers within the stations of Moshelskaya and the Grove couldn't do anything about this. It just kept spreading, killing all in its way. This mold was not, however, formed by the Cobalt bomb. No, once again, this was another creation from the Institute and was released to the world by a scientist known as Voltaire, who would use this creature to be rid of mutants, presumably outside of the city known as Harpies. Basically another version of what we all know as the demons. As members of the metro stations desperately tried to take on what they called the Black Dragon, they would witness its power as it consumed everyone and anything in its path, wiping out the Grove station completely. They realized through the help of this scientist, the man that originally released it, the only way to destroy it once and for all was to reveal it to natural sunlight. But there was a problem. The nuclear winter surrounded the city, and there had been no sunlight since before the war. Their only hope was to make it to the Institute, or be at the Institute's trainling, and hope to find a way to reveal the sunlight again. However, on their journey they found something else. One of the stations, called River Station, had been hit by a horrific epidemic that had killed and mutated all of the inhabitants. Instantly, the scientists knew that this was a virus created as a biological weapon that was tested outside of the city. The theory was that stalkers had found this biological weapon as they scavenged the land, unaware of what it was, and despite all of their protective gear, caught the virus and spread it throughout the station, wiping this part of Novosibirsk out completely, only leaving corpses littered everywhere. Eventually, after witnessing just some of the horrors the Institute had created and released into the world, some of the residents of the main metro station were able to send chemicals into the air through a hot air balloon, exploding it and revealing the sun onto the Black Dragon, killing it once and for all. The metro civilians were free from the black mold that was taking over everything and could focus on rebuilding once again. But down in the metros, it wasn't getting any better either. Novosibirsk was running specifically on hydroelectricity, utilizing pipes that ran through the stations. The residents of the working metro station had to cipher the flooded metro stations around it to utilize the water to power their areas. However, not only were these stations completely flooded, they were also being taken over by another form of mold, but one not as deadly as the Black Dragon. This mold, however, grew all over the piping and provided the perfect environment for mutant worms to build their homes, finding nutrients from decaying bodies and anything in the area. This would provide a massive problem for the residents, as the muck would clog the piping and valves, making it hard for them to get the water through. The muck would also get into the water supply at times and would make residents extremely ill if they absorbed this. To counter this problem, soldiers from the living metro stations were sent in with flamethrowers to take out the muck and the worms to turn back on the water supply to help them power the station once again. This technique worked, although was extremely dangerous, but it wouldn't solve the problem once and for all. The muck constantly grew back and got faster each time, meaning this was an ongoing job for the soldiers. Eventually, the survivors got used to this job and it became part of their everyday lives, clearing out the muck-filled flooded stations to supply their stations with energy, as well as being rid of the creepy, deadly worms that roamed the water. However, once again, their problems didn't stop, and unfortunately just 2 years later in 2035, the surviving citizens of Novosibirsk would be wiped out completely. As the survivors of the Novosibirsk metro entered the year of 2035, things for the residents seemed fine. But up at the top of Oskom, the generals realized there was a massive problem that they had to overcome. After years living within the very shallow metros using the green stuff to survive day to day with no new anti-rad being made, their supplies were dramatically running out. If the green stuff ran out, then the survivors' lifespan would be extremely limited and would most likely die out within a week. Because of this massive reality check, Oskom realized they had to take action, but they could not just let the people of the main stations realize that this was the case. Keeping it secret, the generals sent stalkers up to the surface to find maps of the surrounding area in a hope to find land that hadn't been hit with nuclear bombs and was clean of radiation. A place where they could fully rebuild, exactly what Artyom, Anna and the Colonel were looking for. But after weeks of searching, the stalkers could not find any maps that were of importance, or they didn't bring any back. They were getting more and more desperate, and the residents of the metros started realizing that there was going to be an evacuation plan soon, and refugees started pouring into the main Novosibirsk metro. Because there was no luck finding any green area for the residents to move to, it meant more and more of the green stuff supply was running low. This meant Oskom had to take action and ordered all of their soldiers to halve people's rations of the drug and confiscated any excess they had, meaning that those who were rich sitting on lots of saved green stuff had to give it up, making it a very equal society, but also one that was filled with paranoia and frustration. Removing the green stuff from people turned them from being loyal to the Oskom to angry and wanted to stand against them. Tension was indeed rising within the main station, with residents claiming they weren't being told the truth and that they were now being run by a police state, where their green stuff that they had been working hard for was being taken away from them for no reason. There was also another issue. Because the drug supply was so low, it also meant that even if they did want to evacuate everyone to this new green area they were so desperate to find, there was not enough green stuff to evacuate everyone. This would mean that, unknown to the residents once again, that only the highest Oskom members were to be evacuated, and the rest of the residents of the metro were to be left behind to meet their inevitable fate. Eventually fights broke out and massive riots formed once again, like they did before the bombs fell back in 2013. Military personnel were sent to deal with the rioters, utilizing all their firepower to take them out. The colonel within Oskom, known as Slava, was sent to lead this main assault, taking out hundreds of rioters, setting off a detonation to wipe them out and also cave in some of the metro line. However, as the attack pushed on, Slava witnessed the plan that the highest Oskom members had set up all along, that this was used as a diversion to get their members to evacuate to the train and escape. The general set off the gas canisters, wiping out everyone who was left in the metro stations. Realizing that the general had also been betrayed by the higher-ups, he ordered his men to stop the train and kill the members on it. After this order, the general took his own life, and quickly after that, the city fell silent. The residents gassed to death, soldiers killed, and anyone trying to evacuate the area probably killed by the immense radiation of the city. Only two remained, Colonel Slava and his son. But desperate to get out of the area with his son, Slava had to find that map, meaning that he had to leave his son behind 2 months after the events of the second failed evacuation of Novosibirsk. If he could find this map, maybe, just maybe, they could survive and rebuild their life in a new area. However, after finding the rumoured map that they had been long looking for, Slava was attacked by a blind one roaming the area. This destroyed his last vial of green stuff, meaning he was vulnerable to the high radiation of the surface. Whilst he survived the attack of the blind one, Slava was overwhelmed by the incredible power of the radiation and was frozen in place and eventually died, leaving his son back in the station, unaware that his father had found that final place of hope. But luckily, thanks to the train known as the Aurora arriving in the city, Colonel Miller was able to find this map, and after some delicate words to the body of Slava regarding his son, the Spartans in the Aurora were able to use this map for their own use and find that green patch of land to find a place to fully rebuild. Everyone is now gone from Novosibirsk, with the only things known to be left there being the mutants and the blind ones who roam the institute. The city known as Novosibirsk was now officially the dead city, with no one surviving on the surface or underground. But that is the known English lore behind the Novosibirsk, aka the Dead City. Why do I say English lore? Well, that is simply because there are other books on Novosibirsk. However, they are either just in Russian and unavailable in the West, or loosely translated to German. So for now, this was simply from the games and actually one book known as To See the Sun. And speaking of which, I'd like to massively thank Rusavot, who helped me translate To See the Sun to English to help with some of the world building of Novosibirsk before the events of Metro Exodus. Thank you so much, man. That really helped. And it was really interesting to see some other sides to Novosibirsk that we haven't explored in the games. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. Also, why not check out my other Metro lore videos, which I've linked in the description below, as well as my other lore playlists. If you enjoyed, why not give it a like and sub if you haven't already? And if you really liked it, why not become a channel member or Patreon supporter for early ad-free access to all my latest videos. And speaking of which, I'd like to thank my loyal supporters really quick. Big thanks to our big fish, Duquesne23 and Rhino Head, our sharks, Connor, the AVP man, and Ryan Garnham, as well as our 3 huge megalodons, Sinus, JJD896, and Whale Such Gaming. Also, big thanks to our YouTube channel member, our Wise One Jambu, as well as my subscribers over on Twitch. All your support means the absolute world to me, and I cannot thank you enough once again. But that is all for now. Thanks again for watching, and I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.